relates to the people and their culture, and its importance in the religious life of the Hebrew people. 1. Religious context. Affirmation. God's sovereignty. The commandment begins with an assertion of God's absolute sovereignty. This is foundational to the Jewish faith. God is not just a deity among others, but is the one and only God, as declared in the Shema, Deuteronomy 6:4. The emphasis is on God's exclusive authority over Israel. Divine providence. The mention of, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, ties the Jewish people to a pivotal moment in their history, the Exodus. This is not just a historical event, but a spiritual act of liberation. God is portrayed not only as a creator, but also as a redeemer who intervenes in the lives of his people. Interlocution. Covenant. The commandment is spoken in the first person, I am the Lord, establishing a direct relationship between God and his people. This covenantal language invites a dialogue, where God's words call for a response of obedience and faithfulness. The Jews are not passive recipients, they are participants in this ongoing relationship. Freedom and obligation. The commandment links freedom, the liberation from Egypt, with obligation, obedience to God. This relationship is reciprocal. God's deliverance comes with the call to follow his commandments. Mnemonics. I am the Lord your God. The phrase is straightforward but rich with meaning. In Hebrew, ani yhwh Elohicha emphasizes God's personal and relational aspect. The term Elohim, God, is plural but signifies unity in the context of Jewish monotheism, while YHWH is the tetragrammaton, God's sacred name, highlighting his eternal, self-existent nature. Who brought you out of the land of Egypt? This is a mnemonic device for the Exodus, an event that every Jew is meant to remember and reflect upon, particularly during the Passover Seder. It serves to reinforce their collective identity as a people liberated by God's power. 2. Spiritual context. Affirmation. Redemption and transformation. The Exodus marks not only a physical liberation from slavery, but also a spiritual transformation. By invoking the Exodus, the commandment calls the people to a higher moral and spiritual life, anchored in the understanding of God's saving acts. Foundation of Jewish identity. The first commandment affirms that Jewish identity is rooted in a specific historical event, the Exodus. The relationship with God is not abstract, but grounded in history and experience. Jews are reminded that they are a chosen people, set apart by God's actions in the world. Interlocution. The role of memory. Jewish spiritual life is heavily focused on memory. The commandment serves as a reminder of God's intervention in the world and in the lives of the Jewish people. It is an invitation to spiritual consciousness and the cultivation of faith based on the remembrance of divine acts. Mnemonics. Out of the house of bondage. This phrase functions as a mnemonic to constantly remind the Jewish people of their past state of oppression and the divine liberation that followed. It encourages them to remain vigilant in their spiritual and moral conduct, knowing that their freedom was a gift from God. 3. Anthropological context. Affirmation. Social and political identity. The commandment establishes not only a religious identity, but also a social and political one. The people of Israel are united under the worship of one God, creating a cohesive society with shared values and a collective destiny. The Exodus signifies not just liberation, but the creation of a nation under God's rule. Breaking of the status quo. In the ancient Near Eastern context, Israel was called to break from the polytheistic cultures surrounding them. The first commandment serves as a rejection of idolatry and a call to embrace a monotheistic worldview, distinguishing Israel from their neighbors. Interlocution. Cultural and religious rejection of idolatry. The commandment's assertion that God is the one who brought Israel out of Egypt was also a rejection of Egypt's pantheon and gods. In this sense, the commandment is a cultural assertion of Jewish identity and a statement about the superiority of Israel's God over the gods of other nations. Mnemonics. Out of the land of Egypt. The land of Egypt is not only a historical location, but also a symbol of oppression, idolatry, and moral decay. The commandment calls the people to remember Egypt as a place of exile, in both a literal and metaphorical sense, urging them to stay true to the values they acquired during their liberation. 4. Philological and pictographic analysis. In ancient Hebrew, the words in the first commandment are rich in visual and symbolic meaning. Let's break down the phrase. Ani, The word for I emphasizes personal identity and subjectivity. In pictographic terms, the aleph represents strength or leader, and the yod suggests a hand, action, or creation. Together, they signify I am as a declaration of personal presence and power. YHWH. This tetragrammaton represents God's eternal, self-existent nature. The pictographs for Yod, He, and Vav emphasize creation, life, and connection. The Yod represents a hand, action, the He represents breath, spirit, and the Vav connects and binds, like a peg or a nail, suggesting a divine being who is intimately involved with creation and life. Elohicha, the word Elohim, is plural but used singularly to refer to the one God. The letter Aleph symbolizes strength, and the letters Lamed and He further suggest guidance and divine presence. The term conveys the idea of God as a mighty, guiding force. Eretz Mitzrayim, the words for land and Egypt, are significant. The pictograph for land suggests stability and foundation, while Mitzrayim is often associated with narrowness or restriction. This evokes the idea of Egypt as a place of limitation and confinement, both physically and spiritually. 5. Connection with the entire verse. The phrase, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, sets the tone for the entirety of the Ten Commandments. It establishes the foundational relationship between God and the Israelites. The first commandment is not just about worship, but also about the freedom and moral responsibility that comes with it. The verse connects the liberation from Egypt with the subsequent giving of the law, suggesting that the commandments are a guide to living in the freedom that God has provided. It emphasizes that the people must live according to divine laws to maintain their relationship with God and remain free from spiritual and moral slavery. Conclusion. The first commandment serves as a foundational declaration of God's sovereignty, a call to remember the Exodus, and a guideline for how the Hebrew people should live in relationship with God. Through philology, anthropology, and spiritual reflection, we see that this commandment is not just a statement of belief but a call to action. It shapes the identity of the Jewish people, not only as a religious community but as a socio-political entity rooted in the divine covenant. Its mnemonics, pictographs, and overall message form the core of Jewish life and understanding of freedom, redemption, and responsibility. Complete panorama of the first commandment in Jewish culture. The first commandment from the Torah, found in Exodus 22, reads, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage." This commandment is the foundation of Jewish monotheistic faith and serves as a profound declaration that defines not only the religious life of the Israelites but also their spiritual and anthropological identity. Let's explore this first commandment from multiple perspectives, including philology, anthropology, and the larger historical and political context of its time. 1. Religious context. Affirmation. God's sovereignty. The first affirmation in this commandment is the declaration of the absolute sovereignty of God. The statement, "I am the Lord your God," sets the foundation of Jewish monotheism. This is not merely a declaration of existence, but a statement of dominion over all of creation and, importantly, over the nation of Israel. God is not one of many gods, but the one, true God who claims exclusive authority over Israel. Divine redemption. The phrase, "who brought you out of the land of Egypt," highlights the redemptive action of God. The Exodus is a pivotal event in Jewish history, marking the moment when God liberated the Israelites from slavery, asserting his power over their oppressors. It emphasizes that salvation is not just about physical freedom, but also a spiritual liberation initiated by God's will. Interlocution. Covenant and relationship. The commandment establishes a covenantal relationship between God and Israel. This covenant is not a mere legal contract, but a profound, intimate relationship. God's declaration, "I am the Lord your God," speaks of a personal, ongoing relationship between God and his people, which includes guidance, protection, and responsibility on both sides. Obligation and freedom. The mention of being freed from Egypt sets up a profound relationship between freedom and obligation. While the Exodus represents the people's freedom from slavery, that freedom comes with a responsibility to serve and obey the one true God as their liberator. Mnemonics. "I am the Lord your God." The phrase is designed to instantly remind the people of their personal and direct connection to God. The Hebrew word, ani, carries a sense of personal affirmation. I, as the personal, involved God. YHWH, God's sacred name, evokes God's eternal and self-existent nature, emphasizing his unchanging and constant presence. Brought you out of the land of Egypt. The Exodus is a mnemonic device used throughout Jewish tradition, especially during Passover, Pesach, to remind the people of their liberation and to encourage them to always remember their history and their reliance on God's power. 2. Spiritual context. Affirmation. Spiritual identity and purpose. The first commandment affirms the spiritual identity of the Israelites. Their purpose is to live in relationship with God, who has chosen them as a people for himself. The act of deliverance from Egypt is not just a historical event, but a spiritual rebirth, and the commandments that follow are part of this renewed identity and mission. Monotheism and holiness. The commandment also affirms the monotheistic essence of Judaism. By recognizing God's sole role in their salvation, the Israelites are called to reject idolatry and the worship of other gods. This establishes holiness as a key aspect of their spiritual mission. Interlocution. Memory and worship. This commandment invites the people to remember and worship. The focus on memory in the commandment is not passive but active, urging them to internalize their liberation and to allow that memory to shape their worship. Worship is not just about rituals. It is deeply connected to the spiritual memory of God's redemptive act. Mnemonics. House of bondage. This phrase serves as a powerful mnemonic to constantly recall the oppression that preceded liberation. In Jewish spirituality, there is a constant call to remember the bitterness of slavery, ensuring that it is never forgotten and thus reinforcing the gratitude for freedom and the responsibility that comes with it. 3. Anthropological context. Affirmation. Formation of a national identity. The first commandment lays the foundation for the formation of a national identity. It is not just a spiritual or religious declaration, it has profound socio-political implications. The Exodus marks the birth of Israel as a nation under God. This national identity is rooted in God's actions rather than in ethnic or tribal lines alone. Rejection of other gods. The assertion, "I am the Lord your God," serves as a rejection of the polytheistic worldview that was prevalent in the ancient Near East. By stating that God alone is the source of their identity and freedom, The Israelites are called to reject not only other gods, but also the social systems that upheld their worship, such as the Egyptian system that enslaved them. Interlocution. Cultural identity and distinction. The first commandment makes clear that the Israelites are to distinguish themselves from their neighbors, especially in terms of religious practice. The Egyptian gods and political systems are rejected, and the commandment invites the Israelites to create a culture and society based on God's laws, which govern both their relationship with God and with one another. Mnemonics. Land of Egypt. The land of Egypt is more than a geographic location. It becomes a symbol of oppression, idolatry, and moral decay. The people are urged to constantly remember Egypt, as it represents a state of exile, both physical and spiritual, from the divine presence. 4. Philological and pictographic analysis. Philological breakdown of key words. Ani, the word I suggests a personal and active declaration of existence. The Aleph is associated with strength and leadership, while the Yod suggests action. Together, they imply an active, sovereign God present with his people. YHWH, the Tetragrammaton, God's sacred name, reflects God's eternality and self-existence. The pictographs represent aspects of creation and presence. Yod, a hand, symbolizes action in creation. He, breath, symbolizes life and spirit, and Vav, a hook or peg, suggests connection and binding. Elohicha, Elohim, refers to God in a plural sense but used singularly here. The word emphasizes God's power and authority over the heavens and earth. The pictographs for Aleph and Lamed reflect strength and guidance, respectively. Eretz Mitzrayim, Eretz, land, suggests foundation and stability, while Mitzrayim, Egypt, is derived from the root meaning narrow or constrained, symbolizing a place of oppression and limitation. Pictographic significance. Ani, I, the Aleph, suggests the strength of God, and the Yod represents the action or creative force of God. YHWH, the Tetragrammaton, is built around the concept of existence, that God is the creator and sustainer of all things. Elohim, the word conveys the idea of mighty power, dominion, and holiness of God, reinforcing his role as both creator and ruler of the universe. Eretz Mitzrayim, the imagery of Egypt as a constrained land, speaks to the narrow, limiting experience of the Israelites in slavery. 5. Connection to the entire verse. The verse, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, connects deeply with the entire 10 Commandments. It is the preface that grounds the commandments in the act of salvation. The commandments are not arbitrary rules, but are framed as part of the covenant relationship God established with the Israelites after delivering them from Egypt. The deliverance from slavery sets the foundation for the ethical and moral conduct demanded by God. Every commandment thereafter is an extension of this relationship and redemption, inviting the people to live in a manner worthy of the God who freed them. Conclusion. The first commandment is a declaration of God's sovereignty and a reminder of his redemptive act in the Exodus. Through its philological and pictographic analysis, we understand its depth as a statement of relationship and identity, not just a rule. It forms the foundation for Jewish spirituality, national identity, and ethical conduct, calling the people of Israel to remember and live in light of the freedom they were granted through divine intervention. Analysis of the word lo in the context of the first commandment in Jewish culture. Religious and spiritual context. 1. Affirmation. Divine exclusivity. The use of the word lo in the first commandment serves as a powerful tool of prohibition and exclusivity. It represents God's absolute demand for loyalty and devotion from the people of Israel. By starting with a negation, "You shall have no other gods before me," God is affirming that no other entity or idol is to be revered or worshipped, emphasizing his unique and supreme nature. Covenant relationship. The word establishes the terms of the covenant, marking a clear boundary between Israel and the surrounding nations who worship multiple deities. It's a prohibition that aims to preserve the spiritual integrity and distinct identity of the Israelites, maintaining their singular relationship with God. 2. Interlocution. God's voice as authority. By using God speaks with the authority of one who demands complete allegiance. The negation is not just a matter of preference, but a matter of life and death within the covenant. This is not just an advisory prohibition, but a directive that must be followed to maintain the purity of Israel's worship. Interpersonal dialogue in the broader sense represents an interpersonal dialogue between God and the people. The people are expected to respond by turning away from any form of polytheism or idolatry, answering God's call to exclusivity and faithfulness. 3. Mnemonics. The word lo is a concise and easily memorable term that acts as a marker for prohibitions in the Torah. It is used in various commandments to convey the absolute negation of a behavior or action. In the mnemonic sense, it's a constant reminder to reject any forms of spiritual dilution, keeping God as the sole object of worship. Philological context. Absolute negation. The word lo is the primary negation particle in Hebrew. In biblical Hebrew, it's a strong, emphatic negation, making it more than a simple no. It conveys an absolute prohibition, emphasizing that there is no allowance or exception in this command. This reflects the uncompromising nature of the first commandment: no other gods, no idols, and no compromises in the worship of God. Anthropological context. Prohibition as a cultural marker. In the ancient world, gods were often associated with nations, communities, and cultures. To declare a prohibition of worshiping other gods, in this case, the first commandment, is to draw a sharp line between Israel and other nations. Lo is not just a spiritual command, but also an anthropological one, marking the identity of Israel as set apart. Spiritual identity and exclusivity. The prohibition reinforces the spiritual exclusivity of Israel. It emphasizes the people's covenantal relationship with the one true God. The commandment doesn't just address worship, it addresses the cultural identity, social relationships, and spiritual practices of Israel. Maintaining a distinct identity. In the ancient Near East, worship of multiple gods was the norm. By prohibiting worship of other gods, the Torah aims to preserve the distinctiveness of the Israelite identity, ensuring that Israel's religious and social practices are wholly dedicated to the service of their God. Pictographic analysis. The letters of lo. Lamed, the letter in ancient Hebrew, has the pictographic meaning of a staff or a goad, symbolizing leadership, teaching, or authority. It suggests guidance, and here it might represent God's authority in directing the people of Israel. Aleph, the letter, symbolizes an ox, representing strength, power, and leadership. In the context of the word, it reinforces the idea of a powerful and supreme entity, God, who alone has the strength and authority to command exclusivity. Symbolic interpretation. Together, lo can be seen as a combination of authority and strength. It is not just a mere no, but a declaration of divine strength and leadership over the people, guiding them away from idolatry and other gods. Connection with the entire verse. The first commandment. The first commandment, "You shall have no other gods before me," Exodus 23, is foundational to the entire Torah and to the identity of Israel. The word in this context serves as a clear, unambiguous negation of any form of idol worship or polytheism. Relation to the covenant. The use of lo frames the relationship between God and Israel as one of total commitment and exclusivity. It's not merely a suggestion, but a command to define Israel's identity around their exclusive worship of the one true God. Theological implication. The negation of all other gods by using lo emphasizes that there is no other option, no space for polytheism in the worship of Israel's God. This prohibition establishes the purity of the worship that God expects from his people. In conclusion, the word lo encapsulates the absolute nature of the first commandment, representing a firm boundary between the Israelites and the polytheistic world around them. It serves as a strong cultural, religious, and spiritual marker, guiding the people to remain faithful to God alone. The pictographic elements of the word emphasize divine authority and strength, reinforcing the exclusivity of the covenant between God and Israel. Analysis of the word, lacha, in the context of the first commandment in Jewish culture. Religious and spiritual context. 1. Affirmation. Personal relationship with God. The word, lacha, meaning to you, signifies that the commandment is not addressed to the collective group of Israel alone, but directly to each individual within the nation. This personal connection emphasizes that every Israelite is called to acknowledge God as their singular deity. It fosters a deeply individual commitment to monotheism, where the relationship with God is not merely communal but personal. Responsibility of every individual. By addressing each person directly, the word, lacha, stresses the personal responsibility that each individual carries in fulfilling the covenant. It highlights that the commandment is not just a group obligation, but an individual duty to keep God at the center of one's life. This reinforces the idea that each person must actively choose to worship God alone. 2. Interlocution. Direct command from God to each individual. The inclusion of lacha in the first commandment indicates a direct communication from God to every person in Israel. This relationship is not mediated by a priest or prophet, but is direct and personal. It also implies that God's law and expectations are not abstract or impersonal. They are deeply relevant to the daily life and choices of each individual. God's exclusive right to the people. The phrase, to you, indicates that God is claiming exclusive possession of the people of Israel. This is an expression of God's sovereignty, stating that He alone is worthy of the people's devotion. This is important because in the context of polytheistic cultures, the gods were often seen as belonging to particular cities or peoples. The use of lacha emphasizes that Israel, as a whole and individually, belongs to God and no one else. 3. Mnemonics. Individual and collective memory. The inclusion of lacha helps to embed the first commandment in the memory of every person. It provides a personal touch that makes the commandment memorable, as it speaks directly to the individual. This helps each Israelite internalize the idea that the covenant with God is not a distant or corporate one, but a deeply personal commitment. Personal ownership. The phrase, to you, is a mnemonic device for remembering that the commandment applies to each individual. It reminds each person that the commandment is not general but tailored to them as a unique individual with a personal relationship to God. This reinforces the notion of responsibility, ownership, and personal devotion. Philological context. Preposition and suffix. The word lacha is composed of the preposition lu, which indicates direction, possession, or intention, and the suffix ka, which is the masculine singular form of the pronominal suffix meaning your. Together, the word translates as to you or your. This construction indicates both direction, toward someone, and possession, belonging to someone. Indicating possession and direction, the preposition points to a sense of direction or purpose, indicating that the commandment is directed toward the individual, guiding them toward an exclusive relationship with God. The pronominal suffix adds a personal dimension, emphasizing that the commandment applies to the individual, reinforcing the idea of personal responsibility and exclusive devotion. Anthropological context. Personal commitment and identity. In ancient Israel, identity was often communal, but God's commandment using highlights the shift from a purely communal faith to a deeply personal one. Every individual within the community is seen as having a personal relationship with God, and this relationship requires individual commitment and action. In a context where tribal and family bonds were central, the use of indicates that God's call transcends these traditional ties and speaks directly to the individual. Contrast with surrounding cultures. In the context of the ancient Near East, where deities were often seen as belonging to specific cities, nations, or families, emphasizes Israel's unique relationship with God. Israel's God does not belong to a single region or family. He is the universal God, yet he speaks individually to each Israelite. This individualization of the covenant was unique and marked Israel's cultural and spiritual distinction from the polytheistic societies around them. Pictographic analysis. The letters of lacha. Lamed, the letter, lamed, symbolizes a shepherd's staff or teaching, indicating guidance, leadership, and direction. It reflects God's guidance toward a singular truth and the direction of one's life toward devotion to Him. In the context of the first commandment, this suggests that the individual is being guided toward God's exclusive worship. Ka, the suffix, ka, is a pronominal suffix meaning your, indicating possession. It highlights the personal relationship and individual responsibility of the worshipper. The letter, kaf, symbolizes a hand or palm, which can be interpreted as an offering or a gesture of acceptance, reinforcing the idea of personal engagement and active participation in the covenant. Symbolic interpretation. The combination of lamed and ka signifies both guidance and personal ownership. It highlights that God is guiding the individual Israelite towards exclusive worship, and that each person has a personal responsibility in fulfilling the covenant. The individual is not just a passive recipient of the law, but is called to actively engage in the worship and service of God. Connection with the entire verse. Personal responsibility in the first commandment. The first commandment, "You shall have no other gods before me," Exodus 23, is directly addressed to the individual, and the use of lacha emphasizes that this commandment is not just a communal obligation but a personal one. Each individual Israelite is directly accountable for upholding God's exclusivity in their life. The commandment calls for a personal and unbroken commitment to God, with marking the direct, personal relationship between each person and God. Exclusivity and personal commitment. The word helps to deepen the significance of the first commandment, reinforcing the idea that God is not just the God of the nation as a whole, but the God of each individual. It stresses that the relationship between God and the people is personal, not just collective, and each person's commitment to the covenant is an individual responsibility. In conclusion, the word lacha in the first commandment plays a crucial role in emphasizing the personal and individual aspect of Israel's relationship with God. It directs each person's focus toward God's exclusive worship, establishing that the covenant is not just communal but deeply personal. The use of highlights the individual's responsibility to fulfill the commandment, reinforcing the idea that the exclusive worship of God is a personal obligation. The pictographic analysis of the letters suggests guidance and personal ownership, further reinforcing the theme of individual commitment. This word ultimately connects to the entire verse by emphasizing that the call to worship God alone is addressed directly to every individual in Israel, marking a personal, unbreakable relationship with the divine. Analysis of the word Elohim in the context of the first commandment. Religious context. In Jewish culture, the first commandment, found in Exodus 22, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage," introduces the essential monotheistic principle of Judaism. The word Elohim, traditionally translated as God, is significant because of its plural form. While this might suggest multiple deities, as it derives from the root El, which refers to a god, its use here refers to the one God of Israel, emphasizing the supremacy and sovereignty of this one deity over all others. Affirmation Elohim is understood as the title for the God of Israel, despite its plural form. This is a theological concept where the plural reflects the fullness of God's nature and power, not the existence of multiple gods. It serves as a rejection of polytheism and a declaration of the singular, all-powerful God of Israel. Interlocution. The use of Elohim invites reflection on the tension between the plural form and the monotheistic belief. In a historical and cultural context where polytheism was common, this word points to the need for Jews to distinguish themselves from the surrounding nations, whose beliefs were rooted in the worship of many gods. It challenges the listener or reader to rethink their conception of divinity. Mnemonic. A possible mnemonic device for remembering the word Elohim could be visualizing the plurality of creation in the world, yet recognizing that all of it is under the dominion of one sovereign creator. The plural form becomes a symbol of God's greatness and comprehensive power. Spiritual context. In the spiritual realm, the word Elohim holds a deep connection to God's presence as a creator and lawgiver. The plural aspect reflects the multiple facets of God's nature: creator, judge, sustainer, and redeemer. Affirmation. The plural form in Elohim might represent God's transcendence, encompassing all the forces of the universe. In Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, the plural could allude to the manifestation of divine energy through multiple attributes, sphirot, which come together to form the unified divinity. Interlocution. Elohim invites an exploration of the way God is perceived from a spiritual perspective, not just as a singular entity, but as a dynamic, multifaceted force that governs and sustains the universe. This plural form encourages Jews to contemplate the infinite aspects of God, from his justice to his mercy, from his transcendence to his immanence. Mnemonic. To remember the plural aspect spiritually, one might think of divine attributes represented by many elements of nature, each part revealing a glimpse of the divine but never fully capturing its essence. Every moment of creation is a reminder of God's many facets. Anthropological context. In the ancient Semitic world, the word Elohim likely would have been associated with a pantheon of gods. The culture of the time was deeply entrenched in polytheistic beliefs, where each god controlled different forces of nature. For example, the Canaanites had gods for fertility, storms, and the sea, among others. Affirmation. The commandment challenges this worldview by proclaiming that despite the plural form, only one God governs the universe. It reinforces the move away from a polytheistic society and introduces a radically different worldview that focuses on the omnipotence and unity of God. Interlocution. In an anthropological sense, this word signals a transformation in religious consciousness. As Israelite society breaks away from polytheism, the word Elohim redefines the divine, using a plural form but emphasizing the unique, singular identity of the God of Israel. This shift reflects a cultural and religious evolution, establishing monotheism as a defining feature of Jewish identity. Mnemonic. To understand the historical shift from polytheism to monotheism, one could think of rising above the many voices of the gods, multiple deities, to hear the singular call of one true God, signaling a new cultural paradigm. Pictographic analysis of Elohim. Each letter of the Hebrew word Elohim has its own symbolic significance, and analyzing these letters from a pictographic perspective can reveal deeper insights. Aleph. The first letter of the word Elohim is Aleph, which represents strength, leader, and the oneness of God. In ancient Hebrew, Aleph was depicted as an ox, symbolizing power and leadership. It reflects God's sovereignty. Lamed. The letter Lamed can represent learning, teaching, and guidance. It is often associated with the concept of raising up or ascending, and highlights God's role as a teacher and guide for the people of Israel. Hey. The letter Hey stands for revelation, breath, and divine presence. It is also a symbol of God's immanence, the sense that God is ever present in the world, revealing himself in different forms. Yud. The Yud symbolizes hand or deed. In a spiritual sense, it reflects the divine action of God in the world, the creative force that brings everything into being. Mem Sophet, the final letter, Mem Sophet, represents water and mystery. It is a symbol of the hidden, unknowable aspects of God and the universe, suggesting that there are layers of meaning beyond the surface. Connection with the entire verse. In the first commandment, the use of Elohim emphasizes the establishment of a unique, monotheistic identity for the Israelites. The plural form serves as a rejection of the pagan gods and affirms the sovereignty of the one true God. This ties directly into the broader message of the commandment, the declaration that the God of Israel, who liberated them from Egypt, is not just one of many gods, but the one true God, worthy of exclusive worship. Affirmation of the plural nature of Elohim contrasts with the reality of Israel's faith in one God, reinforcing the distinction between the Israelites and the polytheistic nations around them. Interlocution Elohim challenges both historical and contemporary understandings of divinity, encouraging the reader to reflect on the supremacy of one God, whose sovereignty is beyond the comprehension of finite humanity. Mnemonic. The word Elohim in the first commandment can be remembered as a call to recognize the oneness of God in the midst of a world full of distractions and multiple competing forces. The word itself invites reflection on the strength, guidance, presence, action, and mystery of God, all encapsulated in one singular divine being. In conclusion, the word Elohim encapsulates not only the name of God but also the profound theological, spiritual, and anthropological shift that is introduced in the first commandment. It points to a God who is multifaceted, powerful, and sovereign, guiding Israel towards a unique monotheistic identity. Analysis of the word akrim in the context of the first commandment. Religious context. The term akrim, translated as other, is used in the context of the first commandment to distinguish the one true God from other gods or deities. The first commandment, which declares, "I am the Lord your God," directly addresses the issue of idolatry and the worship of foreign gods. The term akrim here refers to the false gods or foreign deities worshipped by surrounding nations, contrasting them with the singular God of Israel. Affirmation. The use of akrim reinforces the core message of the first commandment, that the God of Israel is unique and exclusive, and no other god or deity, foreign or other, is to be worshipped. This term helps delineate between the true God and the myriad false gods of the ancient world. Interlocution. The word akrim raises the question of what constitutes a foreign or other god in the context of the Jewish faith. It challenges worshippers to consider what they place in the role of divinity in their lives and serves as a reminder to avoid idols or anything that could be considered a false god, whether literal or figurative. Mnemonic. A possible mnemonic for akrim could be the idea of other forces or distractions that attempt to take the place of the true God. Every time you encounter a competing priority, you could remember that akrim represents anything that stands apart from God's sovereign rule. Spiritual context. In a spiritual sense, akrim refers to any forces or influences that lead people away from God's truth. It may not only refer to literal idols, but also to spiritual distractions such as materialism, power, or self-worship. The term highlights the struggle for spiritual purity, where one must avoid being swayed by other desires and inclinations that could lead them astray from the monotheistic path. Affirmation. Akrim reminds the believer that true spiritual devotion requires rejecting all other spiritual forces and keeping one's focus on the one true God. The spiritual goal is to avoid being lured into the worship of false gods, which can take many forms in a world filled with distractions. Interlocution. The use of akrim in the first commandment invites a deeper spiritual reflection on what other gods might be in the modern world. What are the forces that rival God in one's own life? This can include worldly pursuits, personal ambitions, or even relationships that displace one's devotion to God. Mnemonic. To remember akrim spiritually, one might visualize a fork in the road where one path leads to the true God and the other is marked by distractions or idols. Every time one encounters such a fork, the mnemonic would serve as a reminder to stay on the path of monotheism and avoid the other. Anthropological context. In the ancient Semitic world, the idea of akrim as other gods speaks directly to the cultural and religious context of Israel's monotheistic revolution. Surrounding nations, such as the Canaanites, Egyptians, and Babylonians, worshipped a pantheon of gods, each associated with specific elements of life, e.g., fertility, war, or the sun. The commandment condemns this polytheistic worldview, emphasizing instead the exclusive worship of the God of Israel. Affirmation. The concept of akrim affirms the uniqueness of the Israelite religion, which stood apart from the polytheism and idolatry of neighboring cultures. It reinforces Israel's distinct identity as a people dedicated to the one true God. Interlocution. Akrim highlights the tension between Israel and surrounding nations that followed polytheistic or animistic religions. It encourages a cultural reflection on what defines Israel's unique religious identity in contrast to the surrounding cultures that revered other gods. Mnemonic. To understand the cultural significance of akrim, one could picture Israel standing separate from other nations, like an island in the midst of a sea of polytheistic beliefs. This image can serve as a reminder to distinguish oneself from the surrounding culture and remain committed to worshiping the one true God. Pictographic analysis of akrim. Each Hebrew letter of akrim carries its own symbolic weight. Analyzing the letters can provide a deeper understanding of the word's significance. Aleph, the first letter of the word, Aleph, represents strength and unity. It points to God's oneness and power. Here, it contrasts with the idea of multiple gods by symbolizing the singular strength of the true God. Chet, the letter Chet represents life, vitality, and connection. It is often associated with the spiritual breath of life. The Chet in akrim could symbolize how false gods or others do not truly give life and are disconnected from the life-giving God of Israel. Resh, the letter Resh represents head, beginning, and authority. It symbolizes leadership and direction. The resh in Akrim could signify how false gods take a leading role in guiding people's lives, yet their authority is false and misplaced. Yud. The letter Yud represents hand or deed. It signifies action and creation. In Akrim, it may suggest the human tendency to create or form other gods, even though these deities are not of divine origin. Mem Sophet. The final letter Mem Sophet symbolizes water and mystery. It is the letter of the unknown and the hidden. In the context of Akrim, it may signify the elusive nature of false gods, which often promise fulfillment but fail to provide true satisfaction or meaning. Connection with the entire verse. The word Akrim fits into the broader context of the first commandment by emphasizing the distinction between the true God and false deities. The commandment starts with a declaration that Elohim, God, is the sovereign creator who redeemed Israel from Egypt, and then immediately follows by warning against the worship of Akrim, other gods. Affirmation. The use of Akrim establishes the critical teaching that the Israelites must not worship any other gods besides the one true God. This is central to the religious identity of the people of Israel and is foundational to the covenant relationship with God. Interlocution. The presence of Akrim challenges worshippers to confront the reality of false gods in their own lives. Whether literal idols, materialism, or personal idols, they must remain vigilant and devoted to the one God. Mnemonic. The word Akrim serves as a reminder to remove all distractions or foreign influences in one's life that could lead to spiritual disconnection from God. Whether these distractions are physical idols or modern idols of desire, they stand as obstacles to true devotion. Conclusion. The word Akrim plays a crucial role in the first commandment, reinforcing the call to exclusive worship of the one true God while rejecting any other competing deities or distractions. It serves as both a historical challenge to the polytheistic cultures surrounding Israel and a spiritual reminder to keep one's focus on God alone. Through its pictographic analysis, we can deepen our understanding of how false gods are connected to the concepts of disconnection, false leadership, and the elusive nature of idolatry. The word Akrim underscores the idea that true life and fulfillment are found only in devotion to the one God of Israel.